Kingpin was released in 1999, decades ago, in a partnership between ZATRIX Entertainment, who has a very interesting journey that we'll talk about shortly, and Interplay Entertainment, famous at the time for publishing games like Free Space, Earthworm Jim, Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and about 130 other games from 1984 to 1999. Interplay would go on to release another 50 or so games over the following 2 years, games like Star Trek Klingon Academy, Messiah, Sacrifice, and Giant Citizen Kabuto, before being bought out by a company that would itself go bankrupt shortly thereafter, forcing Interplay to sell the Fallout IP to Bethesda. I know that's a lot of history just downloaded into your brain right away, but Interplay is a company that is still around. Their games are still available on GOG and Steam, and they are still working on a new game, Kingpin Reloaded, a remaster of the 1999 Kingpin, at least assuming it ever comes out, since by all accounts it's been in development since either 2014, 2016, or 2020, depending on what source you want to listen to. Kingpin is a really fascinating game for 3 different reasons. First, the story of the companies that developed and produced the game. Secondly, the story of how the game affected the zeitgeist and gaming as an industry, how it helped illustrate to non-gamers that video games weren't all toys for children, and thus helped usher in retailer voluntary age checks for games rated M. Yes, when you go to Best Buy, Walmart, or GameStop and they ask you for your ID to buy the newest M-rated game,
Call of Duty,
Advanced Warfare, Xbox One,
Copy that.
Kingpin is a part of the reason for that. And thirdly, the story of a very mediocre game that is today not particularly good and would have been ignored at the time it was released if not for the controversy, and likely would have been forgotten entirely if not for the potentially upcoming remaster. So let's start with the game itself. Let's look at Kingpin Life of Crime. Kingpin is a pretty standard shooter wrapped in a very unique setting and absolutely dripping with unfulfilled ambition. 2 caveats for this review. I played using the near mandatory MH's patch for Kingpin, which makes it playable on modern computers. It also fixes bugs, increases the resolution, increases texture sizes, enables anisotropic filtering and anti-aliasing lighting improvements, and basically makes the game prettier. For example, here's what the game looks like with the patch, and here's what the game looks like without it. Secondly, on a modern computer, this game loads pretty quickly, but one of the chief complaints from reviews at the time is the incredibly slow loading times and the prevalence of loading zones, something especially noticeable and egregious in the same time period as Half-Life. But I won't be addressing that outside of this sentence because, well, it's not 1999 anymore and I didn't have that problem. However, in basically all other ways, this should feel pretty close to the original. This game has a few very interesting mechanics that I feel I need to explain right up front. First, you can talk to people in positive or negative ways. You have a positive talk button and a negative talk button. You also have the ability to hire muscle characters who will fight any enemies they see and follow you around. You can loot bodies for cash and spend that cash on upgrades, armor, ammo, and health at shops around the game world. When walking around, you can holster your weapon at any time to be non-threatening, and NPCs will react to you based on whether you talk to them negatively or positively, and whether you have a weapon unholstered. There's even a couple innovations in this game that never really showed up in other games, such as having separate head armor, chest armor, and leg armor, and combined with the area-specific damage, such that headshots do more than leg shots, there is some level of target acquisition skill when dispatching an enemy who might have chest and head armor, but his legs are unarmored, versus a heavily armored enemy with their head exposed. The AI, while being somewhere between brain-dead rushing shotgunners and enemies who will run away if they get too badly damaged, is certainly no worse than any Quake enemy, though significantly dumber than Half-Life, which was released a year prior, or Deus Ex, which would come out the the year after. The weapons are weak and very frustrating to use, and the enemies take a significant amount of damage. Upgrading your weapons with modifications at the pawn shop is not something that is optional, but rather without which you will have a very tanky experience. The first enemy that you meet takes roughly 20 shots for a basic vanilla pistol. Yes, 20 bullets. As such, hiring NPC bodyguards is incredibly important at times as they have infinite ammo, and you do not. And they take a lot more damage than you as well. It's unfortunate that the enemies will almost always choose to continue to attack the player, meaning the most efficient thing you can do is jiggle peek corners and shoot around your own meat shields. This makes the economy pretty uncomfortable at times as you need money for ammo, for weapon upgrades, for medkits and armor, and to hire NPCs. Plus the fact that several locations in the game are cash gated, requiring you to pay for entrance. It's not a high amount, but the game does require you to pay attention to your economy, and players are incentivized to complete side quests, kill and loot everyone, including neutral NPCs, and even engage in some good old-fashioned GTA-style gameplay, where you pay someone for an item and then kill them to get the cash back. Sadly, a lot of the flexibility of the gameplay and the metagame of focusing on your economy is thrown away by the fact that the pawn shop will only carry certain upgrades. If you go to buy them on later levels, the shop will sadly inform you that they're out of that particular item. If you miss an upgrade, it's missed for the entire game, further bludgeoning you with the economy and making the entire cash system feel pointless. The story, as much as there can be said to be one, is incredibly simple. You are a nameless thug, or perhaps your name is Thug, and the local gang is mad at you, so they beat you up to warn you off, and you're out for revenge. Each level furthers this plot in small ways, whether it be working with local mob boss Louie, who wants to but can't help you until you secure blackmail that's being held against him, or investigating the kidnapping of gang enforcer Big Willie's girlfriend by Siegfried Heilmann, and in turn securing Big Willie's gang muscle for the fight against the Kingpin. The game will take you through the various echelons of crime in this fictional city, starting with local motorcycle gangs and petty crime, moving up to safecrackers and more than a few kidnappers, securing allies from gangs in multiple cities, and then finally taking on the gang boss who had you beat and the Kingpin who he reports to. Characters are strongly based on The Big Lebowski and Pulp Fiction, with Kingpin's The Jesus being based on The Big Lebowski's Jesus Quintana, as played by John Turturro, and the Kingpin being based on Pulp Fiction's Marcellus Wallace, as played by Ving Rhames.
How far do you want me to go with this?
How far? I'm prepared to scour the earth for this. He goes back to Skid Row. I want to hiding in a dumpster ready to pop a cap in his.
I will take care of it.
What's your search? How do you want it done?
I'm prepared to scour the earth for that. If Butch goes to Indochina, I want to hiding in a bowl of rice ready to pop a cap in his.
I will take care of it.
They often directly quote the movies, line for line. Unfortunately, as thrilling as that story sounds, it's not readily apparent in any of the levels. It's not cohesively delivered, and with the demands of realism combined with the wobbly, Quake-era character models and blurry textures of the game, is a good chance you won't actually realize who you're killing or why until an expletive-laden cutscene tries to pull it all together. And this is what ultimately Kingpin is remembered for. Cursing. Lots and lots of cursing. Every other sentence is Falcon. That guy, that Falcon. Falcon. Or what the Falcon? Is the Falcon. Problem, you piece of sugar, Mr. Falcon. Now keep your apple. It's out of Poisonville, you Falcon. There's a good chance that if anyone were to count all the blue language in Kingpin, it would be in the top lists right up there with Mafia 2, San Andreas, and House of the Dead Overkill. The plot is then draped over what feels like two different games. The first big level hub, and then the rest of the game. And yes, you heard me correctly, level hubs. Kingpin is one of the first games to take advantage of the, at the time, newest trend in games of allowing and even encouraging players to move back and forth between a group of levels to complete objectives. You'll be introduced to locations, say a garage, see your objective, a motorcycle with no battery, then traverse several different maps to find your objective, then bring it back to the first to complete the level hub's overall objective. For example, getting a motorcycle and leaving town. In these hubs, you experience levels that are primarily intended to feel non-combative. Bars with patrons, streets and alleyways, pawn shops. Inside of these worlds are enemy territories, buildings that have bad guys inside of them, and they will generally leave you be until you trespass or threaten them. In practice, these tend to be small groups of enemies guarding level transition areas such as sewers or alleyways. There are technically several of these hubs, but I separate the first from the rest for a couple reasons. The first hub, Skid Row, feels fairly open and natural, realistic-ish. Certainly, you can kill everyone you meet, and you might even choose to do that, but by no means do you have to. There was a lot of effort put into making this series of 4 or 5 levels feel like a real place that people could exist in. Crimes are primarily happening in alleyways and warehouses, and you can walk the streets mostly unaccosted. And as you move further into enemy territory, you also find yourself in neutral places like apartment buildings. After you leave Skid Row on your stolen motorcycle, you'll find yourself in Poisonville, another group of levels centering around a single bar run by Louis, the aforementioned local gang leader who wants you to retrieve documents for him. The chief conceit here is that rather than finding a motorcycle battery, you'll be escorting one of 2 safecrackers to a safe in a warehouse that they can open for you. There's 2 of them because one of them could die, and it's a remarkably user-friendly and also somewhat funny idea to give you 2 different safecrackers in case you're not good enough at protecting the first one. Retrieve the documents and on to the next level. This is also where the game design makes a pretty significant change in flow. While there are some neutral NPCs in the game, from this point forward, you are primarily killing people in a mostly linear fashion. Yes, there's still technically hub levels, but the experience and immersion of being in a city is pretty quickly forgotten for bog standard linear shooter levels. It quickly just becomes kill everyone. Kill everyone at the pier, kill everyone on the boat, kill everyone in the steel factory, kill everyone at the train yard, kill everyone in the city, kill everyone in the high-rise tower. Gone is the negative positive NPC interactions. In one of the later levels, there are, as I remember, only 3 actually neutral NPCs, and if you talk to them at all, positive or negative, they attack you. Quests stop being about finding and collecting something and start being go kill all the people in this location, go kill everyone in the warehouse, go kill everyone in the factory, go kill everyone in the sewer. There's even a side quest where a bartender asks you to save her brother who has been kidnapped. A common problem in this game world, as you might have realized. However, there is no incentive to keep her brother alive. He can die and you can complete the quest, and in fact, if you kill him yourself, you can just loot him and turn in the quest immediately without any of the escort level babysitting. Because as you might imagine, in a game where the AI is mostly non-existent, trying to corral and keep alive an NPC is more headache than it's worth. In fact, I lost him several times trying before killing him in frustration and discovering the easy way of completing the quest. This means that even the quest that isn't about killing everyone is solved easier if you just kill everyone. So what about actually killing everyone? Is that fun and exciting? Well, no, not really. It is surprising how easily enemies can kill you in Kingpin. In fact, this game is really, really hard. Any difficulty setting above and including normal, and the enemies are just purely broken. They have instantaneous reactions. They can literally turn 180 degrees and begin rapid firing their machine guns into your face from across the map. They have perfect aim and no recoil. They fire their semi-automatic weapons at automatic weapon speeds. They seemingly always hit you in the face, coupled with cheap level design such that enemies are often tucked into corners behind doors. As was popular with games like Doom 3, pick up a consumable, complete a quest item, or unlock a door, and you'll also spawn more enemies to fight. Plus, the enemies are incredibly tanky. I mentioned that it takes 20 bullets from an unmodded pistol to kill the first enemy, and they only get more health and armor from there. By the end, you will be shooting people with rockets and heavy machine guns because there's simply no other way to actually kill them. The pistol is useless, the Tommy gun is useless, the crowbar and lead pipe are useless. I'd suggest you use the grenade launcher, but in a mind-boggling decision, it only fires timed rounds, not impact rounds. So really, you're limited to the shotgun. Rushing up on the enemy and blasting them 2 or 3 times with the shotgun is a pretty good tactic. The heavy machine gun, which fires in 3-round bursts with a long reset time, is pretty good at clearing out average bad guys if you have enough ammo. And then you've got the rocket launcher and the flamethrower. Both of these are very limited on ammo, but are effective, though you'll find yourself hoarding them for especially tough fights, such as bosses. You don't want to go wasting them on the regular bad guys when a boss might take 15 or 20 rocket hits to kill. These fights are set to repetitive music from Cypress Hill, assuming you picked up the game on GOG because there's no in-game background music for the Steam release, and just 5 to 10 second instrumental loops from the in-game radios, all played in loving mandatory stereo. Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise, as I can't imagine what it's like listening to the same 3 songs on repeat for 6 to 10 hours. All of this is couched in a world that is aesthetically very interesting. We don't see this type of world in games, not just not very often, but basically not at all. It's a weird mashup of 1930s metropolis-style futurism and Art Deco and 1980s Latino gang culture. There are bikers and German fishing magnates, seedy bars and sky trams. It feels a little like Blade Runner mixed with Judge Dredd. There is, by all accounts, no law, a criminal-run and criminal-populated world, as if the entire game takes place inside one of the prison islands from Escape from LA. You'll travel through truly distinct areas in this world, slum apartments and train yards, chemical plants and steel factories filled with molten metal, and even areas that are evocative of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks and Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest. This world, or even something that approximates it, shows up in Kingpin and essentially nowhere else, and it's very fresh. You don't feel like you're playing through yet another World War game. Even the sewer levels feel different simply because how many sewer levels also have a subway train going through them that you have to evade. However, all of this is hindered by the absurd difficulty of the game, the poor writing and over-reliance on shock as a sales factor, and issues in the game itself beyond just economy and gunplay. There are so many little things you'll find to annoy you in this game, things that pull you out. Melee weapons are unreliably uncertain, and you could smack something right in front of you and not hit at all. There are little rats running around the entire game that do damage to you over and over again, and you can't hit them because the melee weapons aren't reliably accurate. The AI companions are fickle and stupid, and while you can technically, hire them and give them commands, such as follow or stay here. There are moments, like the safecracking level, where it took me an irresponsibly long time to figure out how to get the safecracker to actually crack the safe. The characters in the world are also similarly one-dimensional, and outside of actual scripted interactions, they simply stand in one spot saying the same Falcon-filled statements over and over again. This is made worse by the fact that outside of the first level hub, you'll basically never actually speak to characters again, with limited exceptions. The positive-negative system makes no change to the gameplay, and it's easier to just click positive on everyone than try to actually interact. The weapons are underpowered, certainly, but some are actually kind of broken. And boy, is that a fun moment to die because the gun doesn't work right. The flamethrower won't light anyone on fire if they're too close to you, for example, which is a whole different kind of problem to the grenade launcher whose grenades take too long to explode. The final boss fight includes a side character that is literally impervious to damage, completely 100% invulnerable, and exists solely to make it harder for you to win while also keeping the character alive for what was a woefully over-ambitious attempt at sequel baiting. And that's not even bringing up the unfortunate moments when you get stuck in an autosave with nearly zero health and zero ammo and just have to make it work. This is also outside of the random bugs, like characters that can see you and shoot you through walls. All the problems are too much to overcome. And the level design turns the game from what could have been an early competitor to games like Deus Ex into another shooter. And while games like Duke Nukem were having you find blue key cards to open blue doors, Kingpin switches that out for quests that ultimately serve the exact same purpose. In the end, Kingpin really doesn't have a lot for anyone anymore. Back when it was released, it was already competing with Half-Life and Op4, Medal of Honor, System Shock 2, Outcast, Blood 2, Alien vs. Predator, Sin, Delta Force, and so many other much more relevant and worthwhile game titles. Today, it's not even competition anymore, except that it's still filled with people saying Falcon, which is certainly something interesting, at least. Frankly, the only people who could enjoy this are the same who would write a review like this one.
Kingpin's look and overall presentation will literally blow your head off. You'll notice all the quiet extras such as subtle lighting effects, highly detailed buildings, beautifully rendered NPCs, especially the ladies, even the rats. Seriously, this game has some sweetly rendered characters. The whores look like whores. The hitmen look like hitmen. The bums look like bums. And the cussing, no matter how many times I heard the F word, man, it just made my neck hair raise in rage. It would affect me. I have to stand behind this title simply because I'm a huge action film buff. John Woo equals higher being, and I love action games, and boy, does this game have a lot of action. To put it bluntly, if you take this game at face value for blood and action, you'll just love Kingpin Life of Crime. If you go in there with cocky high standards, yeah, you may grow tired of it rather quickly.
Kingpin was developed by Zeitgeist Entertainment and published by Interplay. Interplay, of course, being the company I gave you a brief rundown of in the beginning. And Zeitgeist being a company that would, almost immediately after releasing Kingpin, change its name and hide its past. Zeitgeist came into being in 1993, founded by Drew Markham and Barry Dempsey. Together, they put out a couple of games. Siberia 2, a couple of action-adventure games that saw some popularity on the PlayStation and Sega Saturn. Redneck Rampage and Redneck Rampage Rides Again, which are Duke Nukem clones, but instead of space aliens taking our babes, it's space aliens taking our pigs. Redneck Deer Huntin', which takes that game and removes all the fun parts of it to let you hunt deer and turkeys, but which even today will elicit fan reactions like, this is the best hunting game of all time. Quake 2 The Reckoning, the first official expansion pack for Quake 2, and then Kingpin. Kingpin was released on June 28th, 1999. On June 17th, 1999, just 10 days before release, Zeitrix changed its name from Zeitrix to Gray Matter Interactive. This wasn't reflected in-game, of course, but it was done because of how Kingpin was received. Specifically, how it was received in the US Congress, and we'll talk about that very shortly now. But as Gray Matter, they developed two games: Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Call of Duty United Offensive. Return to Castle Wolfenstein is maybe the single most well-regarded multiplayer game of the early 2000s, and it pretty well rebooted Wolfenstein as a game franchise. Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, Raven's Wolfenstein in 2009, and even Wolfenstein The New Order in 2014 are all considered to be sequels to Return to Castle Wolfenstein. People love this game. In fact, there's still people playing it, making mods for it, and talking about it. It sold incredibly well, did tens of millions of dollars, and sold millions of copies. There was even supposed to be a Return to Castle Wolfenstein movie at one point, written by Roger Avery of Pulp Fiction fame, directed by Rob Cohen from The Fast and the Furious, and produced by Samuel Hadida, who produced the Resident Evil movies. I can't be alone in wishing this movie got made. Return to Castle Wolfenstein is regarded by many as a watershed moment for the FPS genre. It's a clear demarcation of games that came before and games that came after. It has stealth, it has open world movement, it has house-to-house combat, and it is still entirely playable and enjoyable today. A remarkable accomplishment considering that just before it, Gray Matter had been Zeitrix and had produced Kingpin. Call of Duty United Offensive was a well-received expansion pack for the original Call of Duty, and it primarily focused on multiplayer, with the biggest new addition being kill streaks that would allow you to call in tanks and jeeps. And this is what changed the future for Gray Matter, as Activision, the publisher for Call of Duty, purchased Gray Matter and then combined it into a studio that they called Treyarch. Treyarch, of course, went on to be one of the big three studios that develop Call of Duty every year. Treyarch is the one that did Call of Duty 2, Call of Duty 3, World at War, Black Ops 1, 2, 3, and 4, Warzone, Cold War, and Vanguard. You can still see the Gray Matter DNA in their games, and in Black Ops 4, you could buy the Gray Matter bundle, a tribute to their history. Drew Markham, who was one of the co-founders of Zeitrix, went on to do some voices for Spyro, A Hero's Tale, namely Phil the Penguin and Murgatroyd, and also was the chief creative officer for both Vivendi and Sierra, and worked on games like Brutal Legend, Legendary, and Fight Club before passing away in 2018. Barry Dempsey, on the other hand, took the opportunity to leave and went on to work for Hollywood and then EA, and most recently had worked on films such as Avengers Infinity War, Godzilla, King of Monsters, and Dr. Sleep. But their contributions in Kingpin remain, because the one part of the game that people actually liked was the multiplayer. See, for anyone who played Kingpin back in the day, they're not surprised that Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Call of Duty were the next games. And they're also not surprised that Treyarch today is best known for its zombie mode, because Kingpin was also known for its multiplayer. There are even still servers up, about 30 of them at the moment, and you can jump on and play Kingpin multiplayer right now. Though you might have to join a Discord or forum to set up a game night and get a good, healthy population. The world that Kingpin released into was not the world that Kingpin was developed in. Besides the sheer amount of obscenities in the game, the second thing that Kingpin is best remembered for is being the first major FPS released after the Columbine school shooting. Columbine occurred in Littleton, Colorado on April 20th, 1999, and Kingpin was released on June 28th, 1999, just a few short months later. And it was noticeably violent, filled with tons of cursing and objectionable scenarios scenarios, such as the ability to murder civilians. The ads for the game showed things like dead bodies lying in pools of blood, surrounded by the words, "You're gonna die," and encouraging players to, quote, target specific body parts and actually see the damage done, including exit wounds. To, quote, shoot a snitch in the kneecaps, or snuff out a rival with a single headshot and watch them bleed. If a new gang member turns out to be a punk, blast him and make room for new ones. Immerse yourself in the bloody, brutal world of gang warfare. But just know you're gonna die. Today, we have the game. And not only do we know most of this doesn't even occur in the game at all, but also the violence is cartoonish at best, and the world is hardly immersive enough to train you to be a killer at best. If your kid plays Kingpin, he might become a potty mouth. However, in the wake of a shocking high school massacre, people wanted something to blame. And here comes Kingpin, perfectly seeming to take advantage of that controversy and rage. Games were used to being the target of parents and congressmen. Games like Doom, Night Trap, and Mortal Kombat had been paraded around as the ultimate murder simulators. Thrill Kill was canceled because of fear that it would generate so much negative press that violent video games would be censored by the government after it was given an AO rating, something only Manhunt 2 and Hatred have managed to achieve since. Carmageddon 2 spent 6 months in waiting, trying to get approved for publication in the UK thanks to its violence. And Grand Theft Auto was back in the news cycle because it had a new London version of the game. Violent video games were very much a vogue to blame, and then suddenly, out comes this unrepentantly violent game called Kingpin, and it got some attention.
So we ought to think twice about the impact of ads for so-called first-person shooter video games, like the recent ad for a game that invites players to, and I quote, get in touch with your gun-toting, cold-blooded murdering side. I was given today, Arthur brought me the magazine with the ad that he mentioned, and he was kind enough to mark it for me. There really is a gun here. It says, more fun than shooting your neighbor's cat.
Yes, that is President Clinton directing Congress to investigate violent video games primarily because of the marketing materials for Kingpin. This was then followed up shortly thereafter by the National Institute on Media and the Family, highlighting Kingpin as a key example of inappropriate marketing in its video and computer game report card. And then it was pulled in front of the Senate Commerce Committee and was part of a push for a federal study by 2 different federal agencies to determine whether or not video game manufacturers were violating their voluntary rating system by labeling some products unsuitable for children and then marketing those products to them. See, those "you're gonna die" ads started hitting the press mere days after the tragedy at Columbine and showing up in magazines all the way through August. This on top of their website stating that previous game Carmageddon was, quote, the kind of stuff that made politicians and respectable people the world over choke on their high-fiber breakfasts and denounce it as morally bankrupt soul poison. We, frankly, found this reaction rather half-hearted and hope that this time we're giving them all something to really get upset about. Needless to say, the politicians weren't particularly kind to Kingpin, and one politician even blamed Columbine on Kingpin. Never mind that it came out months later. In this environment where a game like Doom was being specifically named as a cause of the massacre, Kingpin was just the final straw. After the Senate authorized those studies on the effects of violent video games and their advertising, several states, including Florida, Minnesota, New York, Illinois, and Pennsylvania, announced their intent to draft legislation to ban or regulate violent video games. Illinois went even further by proposing a law that would make it a crime to sell, rent, or even lend any child under 17 a violent video game. The Senate entertained a law that would fine any retailer another $10,000 for selling mature-rated games to children. This was then followed up by a lawsuit from the families of the Heath school shooting, which had happened in 1997, and frankly, the entire industry was on the defensive about video games and the violence that they depict. Kingpin did try to respond to this in what realistically is the only way they could. They tried to pull the ads, but the magazines were already in print. They added a giant yellow sticker saying the game was 18 plus and had violence in it. They included a disclaimer on violent video games during the install. It says, "In light of the recent acts of youth-related violence that have taken place across America, we thought you should know how Kingpin was initially conceived. Kingpin was never intended for children. This is a game with mature themes made for a mature audience. There was never any attempt to market or influence children to buy Kingpin." And the industry responded as well, with a seriously strict adherence to the rating system. In fact, there are reports that in 1999, you could buy Carmageddon or Mortal Kombat and not be carded, but if you picked up Kingpin, they would ask for ID. Violence in games has been discussed over and over again, and I think I'd like to read 3 quotes that I'll put up on screen. "Seeing constant brutality, viciousness, and unsocial acts results in hardness, intense selfishness, even mercilessness, proportionate to the amount of exposure and its play on the native temperament of the child. Some cease to show resentment to insults, to indignities, and even cruelty towards helpless old people, to women and other children. The tendency of children to imitate the daring deeds seen upon the screen has been illustrated in nearly every court in the land. Train wrecks, robberies, murders, thefts, runaways, and other forms of juvenile delinquency. The imitation is not confined to young boys and girls, but extends even through adolescence and to adults. Then shall we simply allow our children to listen to any story anyone happens to make up, and so receive into their minds ideas often the very opposite of those we shall think they ought to have when they are grown up? I'm sure you've already realized that these quotes are not about video games. Instead, the first one is about televised crime shows from 1954. The second, speaking about the effects of violence as seen in the cinema in 1919. And of course, the last, giving justification for censorship as a necessary condition for building the ideal citizen to inhabit the Republic of Greece as written by Plato around 400 BCE. New forms of content have long been argued about, and video games are no different. Kingpin will be slightly immortalized as one of the impetuses for another round of discussion about what is and isn't appropriate for children, but ultimately it was just the next game. If not for Kingpin, it would have been Soldier of Fortune or Counter-Strike. There was never enough about Kingpin itself to drive the fear and hatred that it did. It was just unlucky. That's the story of Kingpin, a game that ultimately is rather mediocre, but which gained some levels of fame for being obscene, being graphic and violent, and having really bad timing. It's also a game that led to some of the best received games ever made, and a game that still has players decades later, something some games can't manage to do months after release. It's something forgotten about. There are almost no videos about Kingpin on YouTube outside of Let's Plays and a few retrospectives that honestly I haven't watched to avoid tampering with my own opinions, but even still, few enough that I know them. And yet something that when I sat down to make a video about it, I found there was a lot to say. This is no 5-minute roundup video, and that's fascinating in itself. Thank you for watching, and thank you to my patrons who help support this content.